Greetings, dear listeners. This is Jonah Goldberg, host of the Remnant Podcast, brought to you by the Dispatch and Dispatch Media. It's first timer week. We had Emily Oster on yesterday, and now we have. So I should give a little backdrop. People know that I'm now at CNN after 12 years at Fox, and there are pluses and minuses with being at CNN. There were definitely pluses and minuses at being at Fox. One of the I often say this as a joke, but I say it with love. I say one of the best things about being at CNN is you get to interact with a much higher quality Democratic hack. Now, I'm not saying my guest today is a Democratic hack, but the point still stands. And I don't say hack in a bad way necessarily. I just mean that at Fox, the people on the left of center who were like Fox contributors, they were essentially like the Washington Generals, the team that plays the Harlem Globetrotters to entertainingly lose, right? They're sort of kept creatures, handcuffed to a radiator, given a bowl of water or whatever. And the guys at CNN tend to be people who are actually still have influence on the center left or more expertise, that kind of thing. And so it's been good to get to know a new cast of Washington characters. And one of the people that I end up kibitzing and talking to the most is Elliot Williams, who's a legal analyst at CNN. He was also a deputy assistant attorney general back in the Obama years. And adorably, I should say, there's a thing that happens when people have their first kid that they think everybody is fascinated with their first kid the way they are. And there's a very similar thing when people write their first book. Where they just become
go to hell.
sponges for advice and like, am I doing this right? And all that kind of stuff. And so we've been talking about his first book, which sounds great. And it's called 5 Bullets. And it's 5 Bullets, the story of Bernie Goetz, New York's explosive 1980s, and the subway vigilante trial that divided the nation. And we've been talking about book stuff. I told Elliot, by all means, you should definitely record the audio version of your book. And we talked about promotion, whatever. And then he asked recently to come on when the book comes out, which is not till the beginning of next year. And I said, absolutely, you have an open invitation, but why don't we have you on sooner? Because it's not like there isn't legal crap to talk about, and you're a good talker, and we can build up anticipation for when your book comes out. So that's the backstory of why Elliot Williams is here. I'm glad to call him sort of a new friend. And Elliot, welcome to the Remnant.
Thank you. And you actually, I'll give you a teaser. You get thanked in the acknowledgments of the book, Jonah Goldberg.
Do I really?
As one of the seasoned parents of books who has provided nuggets of advice along the way. Yes, Jonah Goldberg. Not even my wife knows who's thanked in the acknowledgments yet. So
there you go.
It's good stuff.
Well, look, my first editor, Adam Bello, son of Saul Bello, he gave me advice years ago, which was books need friends, and because you can get a lot done on the merits and on the subject matter and on the quality of the book and all that kind of stuff, but books need people who are going to proselytize for it.
Oh, no doubt.
And, the corollary to that, which is what I've added, is books also need enemies. Because you need people to, not all books, but like one of the best ways to move a book is to have an argument about it.
We live in an environment in which virality is caused by opposition. And it's not, Jonah, even... I say this about the government shutdown, or I say this about abortion or the death penalty, and you're fighting with me. No, I mean literally somebody putting pineapple on a pizza in the background of their Instagram post for the sole purpose of generating anger among, I just think conflict sells. And that's a cynical way to put it. But no, without question, we need enemies now for most commercial endeavors. It's really a wild aspect of the world we live in.
So as you just hinted at, this is day one of the dystopian hellhole that is the government shutdown.
It's fun. It's so funny that you had the temerity to label me as some lefty, left, and you're the one talking about the dystopian hellholes here. I love these never Trump folks. Like, there's nothing more zealous than a convert. I'll say that. It's anyway.
Hey, I get it, but like I actually haven't changed most of my positions on any.
I'm teasing.
So,
I know.
But
the party left you. I know.
And I was not saying that you were a.
I'm teasing.
Crazy.
No, I knew exactly what you meant. I knew exactly what you meant.
So, all right. So yesterday, again, we're recording this on Wednesday, October 1. Yesterday, there was a strange thing that happened. So the Pentagon convened all of the top generals, which just basically never happened, and which by itself I don't think is like a terrible thing, right? I mean, like, you talk to a normal person and you say, "Oh, did you know that all the generals got together for a conference?" And you're like, "Oh, that makes sense." And then you say, "Well, you know, it never happened before." It's like, "Oh, that's interesting." It just doesn't. There's nothing ominous about that by itself.
You know why it's never happened before? Because we have Zoom. You and I have Riverside.fm, the podcast studio. There are ways to communicate, but fair enough. There's something valuable in connection. We can agree to that.
And so, you had Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, go on at great length about how he doesn't want to see fat people in the military anymore. Okay, whatever. And how physical training is important. Okay, whatever. And spent a lot of time talking about how vital it is that the military be lethal, and that's what the military is for, is to kill people and blow things up. I think that's a direct quote, right? And he even plugged his own book, The Warrior Way, or something like that. And never mind that the U.S. military is founded on the idea of soldiers, not warriors, but that's a different concept or conversation. I thought it was weird. At points, I expected Hegseth to start saying, "And if you order the Trump grill now," which drains out grease and locks in flavor, because it was very infomercially.
Yes, it was very ShamWow. That was like ShamWow foreign policy.
And but
DD7, I think it was DD7 might have been. He might have come out with that.
And then the President of the United States comes on and in a rambling speech towards the end starts talking about how we're going to train the American military by deploying them in American cities.
Yeah.
After setting up this thing about how their whole job is to kill people.
Yeah.
That's weird.
It's weird but again, and I know from, what was it, Third Way, the Democratic group that said the words that people really aren't supposed to use anymore. Right. One of them was Overton window, but it's a great concept. The midpoint or the point of normalcy that people are allowed, that is the, how do you describe it? It's the point of normalcy that exists in how we interact has shifted, right?
Right.
And we have now reached a point where we are discussing whether it's okay that a president of the United States said, "Hey man, our military ought to be using," what did he say? It was developing or working on their skills in American cities
to combat the enemy within.
There was the combat the enemy point, and that's wink, nod, dog whistle, or even air horn stuff. But no, I mean the specific point about training, using our cities as training grounds. And what could that mean, even in the light most charitably to the president? What could it mean other than wink nodding about more violence in cities? And even if we can agree that crime is a concern in the country, now you can read more about it in my book in February, but even if we can agree that crime is a concern to be dealt with, the way to talk about it from the bully pulpit of the presidency is not, we're going to be using our military to use our citizens as target practice, which kind of is the natural conclusion to what he was saying. And again, I don't want to get into the habit in this country of what some might call Trump derangement, or what someone said to me, squirrel politics, of dogs chasing squirrels, going after every little thing that he does as an outrage, right? We don't gain anything from that. However, don't even read between the lines. Listen to the man's own words on that cities thing. It was a very profound comment, a very dangerous one, but that's where we are. That's where the discourse has shifted around the president.
Yeah. I mean, sort of the thing that really pinged my ear was, because I've made a very similar point about terrorists. I mean, real
Mm.
terrorists, right? Is
Mhm.
that one of the reasons why you have more lax rules of engagement with terrorists is because the laws of war say if you're not in uniform, it's sort of like using a hospital as a terrorist staging ground is unlawful according to international law, laws of
Yep.
war, and all that kind of stuff. And so the rules of engagement are going to be different than if you're dealing with a professional uniformed military. And he had this line where he said, in some ways it's even easier when you're fighting a military that has uniforms
because you can take them out.
Because the enemy within, they're in plain clothes and you don't know who's, and that's why they're worse, right? Which is not my point. But he is trying to turn domestic criminals into a terrorist threat.
Yeah,
and that's problem. It really bugs me.
And again, just unpacking what he said, I was genuinely trying to read between the lines of what he meant by the enemy within, because I wasn't sure if it was, okay, Antifa, whatever that may be, A, B, Pookie and Nuck on the corner slinging crack and making neighborhoods less safe, or is it C, people who are unlawfully present in the country? Was it an immigration statement?
Yeah.
Now, to be honest, I think they've all gotten conflated in our world, and certainly under President Trump, this idea of civil enforcement of immigration law, criminal enforcement of basic criminal law in the country, but also national security. They've all gotten lumped together. And if you were to ask Joe Q public walking down the street, what's different in how we enforce immigration laws versus how we treat criminals versus how we treat terrorists, I think they would say there isn't much difference. And as your question, the premise of which I absolutely agree with, suggested, they've all gotten blurred together. And a lot of that is from the president. Now, in addition to all this time at the Justice Department, I was at ICE. I was a senior leader at ICE for 5 years. And I will be the first to tell you, one, each of these three buckets I've identified are very important functions for the country, but they're vastly different and ought to be carried out differently. And civil immigration enforcement serves the country in a different manner than criminal law enforcement than does counterterrorism. Now, certainly they blur together a little bit sometimes, but I just think this speech was a great example of the president smushing it all together and saying that we're just, as a nation, under siege, and desperate times are going to require desperate measures.
Okay, so let's take advantage of your lawyer brain. Let's say it's 2015.
Mm-hmm.
Overton Windows way over there in a field, and they're puppies chasing butterflies in the field, and all that.
Yep.
What is the historically generally recognized understanding of what militaries can and cannot do domestically, and when are those restrictions lifted? How much of it is in the Constitution versus how much of it is in the Posse Comitatus law of 18?
That's a great
question.
That's a great question, and I hadn't thought about that before sitting down. I don't know how explicit the Constitution is with respect to the use of the military. I'd have to look at the verbatim and the read between the lines. Now, certainly, Posse Comitatus is based on the themes embodied in the Constitution, which is that military cannot engage in civilian law enforcement. That's the basic question. Now, in the form, of course, of an insurrection or rebellion or major terrorist attack, a national security threat, the rules do get blurred. But when it comes to military, National Guard, marching down the streets and arresting people for smoking a joint, that is a misuse of our national of the armed services. And as we've seen here in Washington, D.C., there are the images of National Guard members picking up trash around the city, or helping to sweep up or whatever else, because they are limited in their law enforcement abilities. It's a powerful signal to people when they get off trains at Union Station, when you see guys in full TAC gear and the tanks and so on. Okay, we're scared. Don't screw with Washington, D.C., right? Anymore. That's the message that at least is intending to be sent. But they're quite limited in what they can do. And barring some major, and pardon me, one more thing, Jonah. They can actually they can support law enforcement.
Right.
Maybe give them rides, maybe, but even that may cross the line. But certainly in technical back office support or things like that, it's just not. It's not the greatest use of the military's time, at least as the law requires it.
Yeah. So like I as is often the case, there's this distinction that gets lost on people, is that whether something is a good policy or not is, in my mind, largely distinct most of the time from the question of whether it is legal or constitutional.
You
right?
have, and I have probably on television sitting next to you, and if not, have made this point 1,000 times. Just the one sentence line is, just because something's politically popular doesn't make it legal. Because a common argument from Donald Trump's supporters, including on CNN, when particularly in the realm of immigration enforcement, this is what we voted for. This is what 70% of whatever people, the vast majority of Republicans, many Democrats, an overwhelming number of Black and Latino people, more than any other Republican in modern history. This is what they voted for. No, it's not. Right? They thought they were voting for it, but there are still laws that constrain any number of things that the president does. They're two completely distinct points, and you raise a great point there.
Yeah. So, this gets to like one of my great intellectual peeves is and it's sort of like, I don't know if you care about this distinction, but the people who misuse less for fewer.
God.
It drives me crazy.
It actually
But once you get turned on to that, you can't unhear it. And so when I have a similar thing about people who talk about presidential mandates as if the word mandate's in the Constitution, or that if you have a landslide election that somehow the Volksgemeinschaft outpowers your constitutional job description. There's like,
absolutely.
And you hear this a lot from Trump people. You heard it a lot from Obama people too. I mean, it's what de Tocqueville would call a clear but false idea, right? This idea that if a lot of people voted for something, that somehow empowers you to do it. And you get congressmen and senators say, who am I to stand up to the president's mandate? Well, you got elected too in the same election cycle. You have a mandate too. And if you were elected to be a Democrat in the Trump era, then you're not violating anything. And so, but that said, all that said, my only point is that whether or not it's good policy to send the National Guard a bunch of places to deter crime, let's put it this way: if the governor of Illinois continues to say, "Don't send these troops,"
right,
and Trump doesn't do the sort of loophole thing and send them just to protect a federal building, which he has some more leeway to do, but he says blanket sends them in to patrol the streets. Is that actually illegal or unconstitutional?
It's an open legal question, because there is a question as to whether again, I don't have the verbatim, at the direction of the governor or with the
consultation or something.
Yeah. Forgive me, listeners. There's the precise wording of it, but it does say that it ought to go. It's through the governor or through the state's leaders. Now, what does that mean? Does it mean you just got to tell them you're doing it? Does it mean you have to tell the governor and have the governor activate the National Guard? Does it mean that the governor needs to just have heard about it? What does through the governor or through the mayor mean? And that's an open legal question. Now, it has long been interpreted throughout history to be understood that the governor blesses the activation of the National Guard when the president sends it in. Now, it happens in rare instances, where there's real unrest. I think the LA riots might be a big one in 1991. But this notion of J.B. Pritzker saying, we do not wish for this to happen, and the president saying, I'm sorry, here are 5,000 or 2,000 National Guard troops, that hasn't really happened. But, Jonah, to step back just for a bigger law enforcement point, and I say this having worked, this back to the Obama administration, one of the, it's going to sound like such cliche and platitudes, but one of the most important maxims or concepts in law enforcement is agreement or consultation between state and federal entities. Just, you know, we might be of different political parties, we might have different law enforcement aims, but at least pick up the phone and call the governor or call the mayor and say, okay, what would work here? How can we solve this together? And more often than not throughout history, that's worked quite well. This acrimony between the White House and mayors, even of different parties, it's really reached a tipping point in these last years, but particularly these last months.
Okay, and so then I guess a larger part of the question is, to get it into Supreme Court land, is how much of this is justiciable, right? I mean, like, it seems like more and more we're getting. I'm more of a defender of the current court than a lot of people are, but it does feel like we're getting to the point where the Supreme Court is laying out all sorts of areas where they're just going to say, we can't second guess the executive branch on this. Yeah. And so like as I understand it, the debate between Amy Coney Barrett and Ketanji Brown Jackson is, Jackson thinks it's the job of the court to be the arbiter of violations of the Constitution, and Barrett's position is we can only just because other branches exceed their authority, that doesn't mean courts can too. And I think both are legitimate, colorable positions. So like, where do you come down on all that?
It depends what the definition of is backdrop to all this, which is, it all depends on how a particular justice sees the idea of political or policy decisions. If the court is second guessing a policy decision of the president, that's no bueno. That's a no-go. If the court is questioning or adjudicating the legality of something that the president or the White House has done, then that's perfectly in bounds. Now, there's an open question. This gets back to what started our conversation here. Is it legal or not? Did we vote for this legality or not? Many issues that are coming up could be construed as, well, these are just policy choices of the president. For instance, in the national or the foreign policy context, the strikes on for instance, on sending people to Venezuela, identifying them as gang members of Tren de Aragua and removing them to a prison in El Salvador. There's an argument that that's just a policy decision of the president. When you challenge that, you are questioning the president's, number one, immigration policies, and number two, foreign policy authority to identify who is a threat to the country, right? That's a gray area, man, because that, in so doing, you are stretching the language of a statute passed by Congress, which is squarely in the realm of what the Supreme Court ought to be weighing in on. So it really is, what do you define as just a policy decision of the president, and what do you define of breaking the law? And I really think that is the enduring question that is going to come out of this era, the enduring legal question that's going to come out of this era.
Yeah, so like this is why it's bad to have norm-breaking people with bad character in power. I'm serious, because like on the face of it, I'm very sympathetic to the argument that the court should not second guess the president declaring an emergency, a threat to national security and all that kind of stuff. The problem is what do you do when the president is making up the threat to national security? And
that's the thing, right?
And the court is not equipped to be the fact finder on that. Congress is. And so I guess the question is,
and that's, I don't even need you to ask the question. Yeah. I mean, the problem here is that Congress, some of this is a function of our partisan world, but it's just a function of the imperial versus imperiled presidency. Congress, and particularly this Congress, has ceded authority to the president in a way that take Tren de Aragua and the identification of Venezuelans as maybe terrorist threats, maybe just a bunch of bad guys, maybe just guys working at a bodega who got caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Who knows? Right? Who knows? That's for Congress to have hearings on, have oversight on, pass a new law, ask the questions, write the letters, call people in to answer questions about them that under normal times, 20 years ago, let's even go before, definitely before Biden, let's even go before Obama. In the Bush administration, I think even Republican Congresses would have been far more willing to at least ask the questions of the White House saying, wait a second, in the foreign policy context alone, something doesn't smell right. And we just want to make sure that, number one, the laws that we passed as a body 65 years ago, but also the money that we appropriated to you to spend, the money we gave you to spend with clear directions as to how to spend it, isn't being spent well. And that's lost, at least in this Congress. I am genuinely curious, Jonah, that I wake up in the morning thinking about, okay, so let's pretend Democrats win the House of Representatives next November, and come January 2027, then what? Like, okay, does the cabinet come in and sit for oversight hearings? Do they respond to subpoenas? Do they provide documents? I think if we have any indication here, it appears that they would not, and would just blow off even more so. Like what you have now is a Republican Congress not even asking the questions. I think in a few years you would have a Democratic Congress perhaps asking the questions and being blown off. So we've lost the importance of congressional oversight, and that where the court, in that gray area you're talking about with your question, where they're open to questions as to where the court should be, this is absolutely fair ground for Congress, and they're just not doing it.
Yeah, I mean, look, my basic explanation so I have sympathy in the abstract for presidents doing a lot by executive order when Congress won't legislate, because how else are you going to do things, right? And I have sympathy for the courts, who now with all this emergency docket crap, because presidents are the ones legislating and they're not supposed to under our constitutional system, and so they do things that are plausibly outside the lines of the law, and so the courts have to intervene quickly on it, and then people say, how dare these courts do it, right? It is very difficult for me to point to a major problem in the American constitutional order that wouldn't be meaningfully improved, if not absolutely fixed, if Congress just did its job.
Absolutely. 100%. You could not be more right about our country, but also this national moment that we are in. If Congress were, and this is not about impeachment or sticking it to the president or going buck wild or highly partisan televised, none of that. Simply getting the administration to provide documents substantiating some of the positions they've taken, which is a basic core competency of Congress. If any of that was happening, we would be in a far better place as a country. And some of this falls on Democrats too, because they've used Congress and when they've had the gavel, they're serving their own political aims as well. But in general, Congress has ceded authority to the White House. They just have.
Yeah, and I don't even just mean in terms of the fact-finding. I also just there are lots of executive orders that Trump has done or that Biden has done or whoever that were popular with the American people. If they're popular with the American people, write legislation, pass a law, right? I mean, that's how it's supposed to happen. It's amazing how quickly the boiling frog thing or the Overton window moving thing has happened, where when we were growing up, and for the previous 200 years, the way you measured, for the most part, whether someone had a successful presidency was how many laws were passed.
Yeah. Now
that's gone.
Yeah, it's gone. A part of that, though, is how polarized Congress has gotten, particularly the House, but how polarized Congress has gotten just in terms of who is in Congress because of how safe their seats are.
Sure.
So just hear me out, everybody. It's going to take a little explanation, but no, they have very little incentive to compromise, most members of Congress, because they represent seats that they won by 50 points. serving people who really all see the world in largely the same way. Marjorie Taylor Greene has very little incentive to go to Hakeem Jeffries' office and hammer out the details on a bill where everybody gets something, because maybe Hakeem Jeffries is the best example because he represents the whole caucus, but you know what I mean. Maxine Waters, a Democrat from a bright blue district, they have very little incentive. They're not going to be rewarded for sitting down and hammering out the details of legislation. They'll actually be punished for it,
Right.
because their folks are all gerrymandered into heavy partisanship. And that's just so I mean, and one more, Jonah, I think so. That's factor one. I think the general carving up of Congress has made it less likely for one side to agree with the other. That's one. And two, and you and I've talked about this at some length, the internet rewarding hostility,
Right.
but also rewarding fire emoji, I think is the thing that prevents a lot of these members of Congress from really not being the people that they would be behind closed doors if given their druthers. They've got to answer to and when I say the internet, you know what I mean. It's of the ecosystem of shouting that we live in. It just rewards intemperance, and that's now infected our politics.
Yeah. So it's not so much that I disagree with you, because I think we're in violent agreement on almost all of this, but I dissent slightly with the talk about the current Congress being exceptional, because I think this, and it is exceptional. So this is the problem, right? It's like a friend of mine once tweeted years ago, saying, in effect, I'm paraphrasing, but he was like, all this terrible stuff Trump is doing is because of the slippery slope started with Obama. And someone says, yeah, but this is so much worse than what Obama did. And he's like, yeah, that's how slippery slopes work, right? Things get worse. That's the whole idea, right?
Right.
And so my point isn't about Obama. I would actually argue that, and I did not foresee it at all. I was a youngin in Washington, pretty enthusiastic about it at the time. I think Newt Gingrich did more damage to the constitutional order than a lot of people, because the Contract with America stuff, by basically neutering committee chairs, like when we first, well, at least when I first came to Washington, I'm older than you. When I first came to Washington, like the barons of the Senate and the barons of the House, the Dan Rostenkowski guys, right? They were the ones who had enormous outsized power. We all thought, oh, that's terrible. We should do something about that. And it turns out, no, that committee chairs really want to have stuff go through their committee, and having stuff go through your committee requires hearings, debates, adversarial, fact finding, which is like hugely important for a democracy. And so, like, now you have this situation, and I think Nancy drove me crazy, and I had to be on CNN where people were constantly talking about how Nancy Pelosi was the best speaker of the last half century or whatever like that. And I get their argument, but the problem with their argument, by my lights, is that it's goldfish memory, because Nancy Pelosi was part of the problem, where you basically have the leadership in the House and the leadership in the Senate, the gang of eight, right? It's like the four corners, whatever they call it. The whoever's in power, they come up with the legislation in a little room with their staffs, and then they bring it out on tablets, and they present it to the caucus and say, you have 72 hours, if that, to read this thing and agree to it. And then fast forward 6 months, when those members of Congress someone can run ads saying so-and-so voted with Nancy Pelosi 100% of the time. Well, of course, because they were given the only legislation that could take her leave to vote for. And if you had like that, I don't know if you remember the Schoolhouse Rock video about how a bill becomes law. Yeah.
Oh yes.
You would fail the test if you
it's
gave that answer now. Yeah.
You're right. That's a really good point. It's long ways. While I'm sitting in committee, you're not going to sit in committee, dumbass. No. You're on Mike Johnson's desk.
It's now, how a bill should become a law should be the title of that thing. And so I think a lot of including people I admire a great deal, Paul Ryan, a lot of these people had to work with the system that they had, and by not fixing that system, they more entrenched that system. And so now Trump calls Mike Johnson and says, this is what they want the legislation to look like, or this is what I don't want you to do anything at all. And it is like trying to run our politics as a parliamentary democracy through a system that is not designed to be a parliamentary democracy.
You know, it's funny. No, and to your point, no, I definitely didn't mean to suggest that this Congress is an outlier. I mean, slippery slope's a great argument. And it's funny, as you were talking, I was trying to think what was the starting point of the slippery slope. I was like, well, would it have been Tip O'Neill? Would it have been? No, and I think you raised an excellent point with Newt Gingrich being something about it. Now, to the strengths of Nancy Pelosi as a speaker, I guess the question is what makes a good Speaker of the House, and why I would agree with that only for this reason. She kept her folks together in a way that right now. To my point, is that a good thing? Not necessarily if keeping your folks together means Congress isn't compromising. And they're not. They are. But she was immensely effective at stamping out the dissension that she needed. Now,
I think she's a very impressive political operator.
No question about that. No question about that. But how many triumphs of bipartisan legislation, or how many pieces of legislation that were bipartisan triumphs can you identify in the last 25 years? I mean, whether it's the big, beautiful bill, any of the tax provisions that Trump has put through, the Affordable Care Act for Democrats, they tend to be one party overwhelmingly voting for it, and then three people who are scared shitless about losing their seats because they're Republicans in swing districts who also did.
So it would be a waste of resources here having you on and not talk about the Comey indictment.
Oh, I thought you were going to say about the Yankees in the playoffs, and they got the sweatshirt on, and about baking, about any of the above.
We'll say
why my lawn is dead. I don't all the above. But, Comey indictment.
So Comey indictment. And I was just listening. You know, we have a sister podcast here, Advisory Opinions, and they were
of course
debating it. And you know, my friend Andy McCarthy from National Review is very down on this thing. The editors over there are very down on this thing. I'm just going to go out on a limb and assume that you don't think it is the soundest legal case.
It's not. And you know, here's the thing. They got it. They got to here's indisputable facts. Prosecutors got this indictment past a grand jury. That means that at least somewhere there is at least some evidence to suggest that Jim Comey broke the law. To suggest. That's it. That's what they got. Right? Now, number one, getting something past a grand jury is by far not the amount of evidence and not the standard it takes to convict someone. One is probable. Here's how you can dazzle at cocktail parties. One is probable cause. One is reasonable doubt. One, the latter is much, much higher than the former. Right? One. Two, all of the president's statements leading up to and after the indictment about the indictment cast serious doubt on the integrity of the indictment. Number one, if the president really wants Jim Comey to go to jail, he ought to just shut his mouth. Every time he talks, he makes prosecutors work harder by saying the words, "They went after me, and so therefore we need to go after people specifically," and coming from the president of the United States, is laying the groundwork for a malicious or selective prosecution dismissal of the indictment. Without question, you could not make it easier. And quite frankly, most people lose motions for malicious or selective prosecution because you don't have evidence to suggest that the prosecutors targeted you. Donald Trump has said he's targeted these people. Right. So that's my macro backdrop to all of this. There's a natural pushback that people will say, well, Donald Trump was prosecuted. And what about Fani Willis? What about Alvin Bragg? What about? Okay, fine. I would say any of the comments and statements that Bragg made on the campaign, not even Alvin Bragg, it was one offhand comment. It's really Fani Willis and Tish James to an extent, who ran on convicting Donald Trump, right? They as part of their or at least going, at least we're going to look into this. It's just not the same quantum of evidence coming from a president and explicitly saying this indictment is based on the fact that I was aggrieved. And just as an evidentiary matter, I don't think you would ever really succeed in tossing out those indictments. One of which made it to trial, let's be clear, although it was a civil suit, but you know what I mean? Where it's just a different circumstance here. So,
my problem with that argument, and I hear it all the time, and I get it, and it clearly it's one of these things. There are certain arguments that hit the sweet tooth of our lizard brain kind of thing. It's just like, oh, that sounds right, And but if you actually parse it out as a math problem, and you're like, okay, so A did wrong to B, therefore B is justified in prosecuting X. And like it'd be one thing if this was a prosecution of James or somebody or Bragg or whoever for selective prosecution, right? Then, okay. So you thought you were wronged by these people, and so you want to address the wrong that they did by charging them with being wrong about it, right? That kind of thing. Whatever Letitia James did or whatever Alvin Bragg did, and I think what they did was bad, politically ill-advised. Sure. There is no transitive property that then says, and therefore we should maliciously prosecute James Comey.
And one more to add to that. Yes, it's interesting because we can all agree he faced charges from some Democratic prosecutors and some not Democratic prosecutors that have somehow gotten lumped in, Jack Smith being one of them.
Right.
There was never a record suggesting we are prosecuting him to stick it to him. Whether you like it or agree with it or not, the statement was we are sticking it to him because there are serious questions about his continued wrongdoing, right? The mere fact that he was investigated and prosecuted, to your point, has created this sense of entitlement in people to say that, well, that was just as bad or even worse than what Donald Trump is doing by saying, well, I'm just getting back at them. He's explicitly said he is bringing things in outside of the indictment as a basis for the indictment. Because I'm mad at him, I'm going to prosecute him. That is laying an evidentiary basis for getting the whole thing tossed out. And the fact that Alvin Bragg is a Democrat and tried to prosecute Donald Trump just doesn't cut it. It's not the same thing. To your point, Jonah, it's politically ill-advised. Did the country need it? I just saw news that Mitt Romney had told, I don't know if you heard this, told Biden to pardon Trump that, look, even if he did these things, it's probably bad for the nation to go down this road. And let's think of another way to just be Gerald Ford in this scenario, hold your nose and issue the pardon. And there's something in that, even in light of the many serious allegations that Donald Trump faced. There was always going to be a risk that now we're going to enter an era of tit for tat in the United States. I don't know what gets us out of it.
So it's funny, I was going to go down this rabbit hole in a different way, and then you brought up the Romney thing, and it kind of puts a fine point on it. It's a hard thing to articulate, but isn't the lesson of the last 15 years? I mean, I pick your timeline, the recent era, that virtually every time one side does something expedient for an immediate payoff, a victory,
right?
The long-term consequences that they know at some level, or that decent people know is somehow wrong. That the long-term consequence is that it bites you in the ass. And so I was going to do this about Bragg and James and how those cases undermine the legitimacy of the Smith case, which was serious. Like the Mar-a-Lago stuff.
Georgia, don't. Yeah. I will. Oh my God. The Georgia case was not.
So those cases.
Pardon me. Mar-a-Lago. Mar-a-Lago. Yeah. Mar-a-Lago was
a real case.
Was it okay? I'm sorry. You like textbook obstruction of justice. I'm sorry.
Right.
Even setting aside the slurry of stuff that Trump faced. Anyway.
Right. So like, but doing those other things for narrow political constituencies or out of a sense of justice. And I could make the case that some of that stuff that was done against Trump, the New York stuff, the Georgia stuff, was in some ways worse, in other ways not, but in some ways worse because it was an attempt to take a political candidate and a democracy off the board through lawfare. And that's not great. But anyway, Mitt Romney makes the point even better, right? So in 2012, one of the reasons why, if you want to know, I get asked this question a lot from sort of center left, decent people of the CNN green room variety quite often. It's like, what happened to the right? Why'd you guys all lose your minds? Or why did they all lose their minds? And all that kind of stuff. And I can tell a long version of that story. I can tell a short version of that story. I can pick on different chapters and how they buttress my point. But Mitt Romney is a good example. Mitt Romney, I think it is now abundantly clear, is a profoundly decent, upstanding dude. Not perfect because he's a politician, but closer to perfect than most politicians because he's a Mormon. And
I was trying to figure. I was doing the algorithm in my head. What's the Mormon joke I can make and not get canceled? You hit it right there. That was good.
And the way he was treated by the mainstream media, the way he was treated, in 2012, caused, his Bain Capital gave some woman cancer kind of nonsense, right? The binders full of women thing, which I will defend and have defended for almost 15 years, as exactly what progressives ask for from politicians, is that politician gets elected, says, I really think we need more women in our administration. Let me reach out to all these stakeholders who have great networks of highly qualified women and ask them for candidates. And he says, and they sent binders full of women. And he got mocked for that, like he was running for the prime minister of Gilead, right? So every single time we do one of these, and I can point to a gazillion examples from the right as well, right?
Yeah.
Is that it's the Stay Puft Marshmallow problem, is that we constantly choose the means of our own destruction, right? And so wouldn't we be in so much better shape if the Democrats hadn't brought any of those bullshit cases, let the one or two concrete cases work their way through the courts, giving him full access to the process? It would have deprived Trump of this argument.
Yes.
And yet,
no. I disagree with that. I disagree with
it would have made this argument much less plausible when Trump used it.
because I think state and city prosecutors got lumped in with federal prosecutors, got lumped in with Merrick Garland, who literally appointed a special counsel to take it off of his desk so that his hands as the attorney general his fingerprints would not be on it, right? Having Florida, Georgia, New York, federal charges and state charges all together created this big goop of cases that the president could easily point to and say, look, they are all coming against me. And they, 3 of the 4 happened to be elected Democrats who were 3 of the 5 elected Democrats who were, and then 2 of which had spoken about doing so on the campaign trail. The Mar-a-Lago case, and this is the, you were saying the thing you will until you're green in the face. Mine, I want this on my tombstone one day. The Mar-a-Lago case was an exceptionally strong case against the president, not just on the doc, and we're going to talk about that in a second too. Not just on the documents, and I'll explain that, but also on the obstruction of justice. You literally have men moving video footage and talking about doing it at the direction or to please the boss. You had explicit evidence of knowledge of the classification level of documents and still choosing to maintain them. It was far and away the strongest. No, wait a second. The listener is saying, what about Biden and the garage and the glove compartment of the Camaro? That's incompetence, not crime. And I think it's easy to lump in the two. The document retention statute is quite clear that there is a level of intent that is required for it, that the individual has to know they're in possession of these documents and still retain them anyway. It would have just been hard to convict Biden on that. And as the best example of the point I'm making, it's not just Joe Biden, it's Mike Pence. If you know, Mike Pence was also found with documents in his home and was not charged with a crime because he did the thing that, frankly, that Joe Biden did and that many others did, that I would do if in my attic I still have my papers. You just summarily turn them over to the government. Donald Trump did not do that. He should have been prosecuted for that offense, but he got lumped in.
He was on tape reading showing classified documents to people with that clearance, right? I mean, he's like, I probably shouldn't be doing this, you know? I mean, it was insane. But I got so worked up, I distracted myself from my own point. One of the reasons why the right went crazy is that Mitt Romney was treated like a racist monster. And so 4 years later, they're like, look, if they're going to call us fascists and racists no matter what, let's get a guy in here who fights back about that stuff. And that was the argument. That was the backdrop for Trump. Same thing with the Tea Party thing. The Tea Party guys, there were some whack jobs and it later got taken over by grifters. But I went to a lot of the original things, and these were earnest, good citizen types who carried around pocket constitutions and cleaned up after themselves after demonstrations. And they were all called, racists anyway. And or you could take it out of that stuff, like the point about Obama saying, 24 times, I think is the number, that he couldn't do DACA, that he's not a king, I'm not a monarch.
And then did DACA.
And then he does DACA, right? These doing the wrong thing consistently ends up biting your own side in the ass. And and I worry that the Democrats are taking away from this period exactly the lesson that Republicans have taken from the last 15 years, is that it's this slippery slope thing. It's the Chicago way thing. Every time they violate a norm a little, we need to violate a norm a lot. Yeah. And I don't know how you get out of this without some sort of religious great awakening or something.
And to that point, I am genuinely curious on an intellectual level, not a personal political one, genuinely curious as to who the next standard bearer for the Democratic Party is.
Yeah.
I think we probably even talked about this, but I am just curious. Gavin Newsom texting all caps and pretending to be Donald Trump as a joke and trolling the president. Is that really the path forward? Or is it just electing a Trump in the form of Stephen A. Smith at his absolutely most unhinged and unpredictable, and just trying to counter Trump with another Trump, another person from the outside who's not a politician, who's committed to shaking things up? Yeah. Is it that? Is it, J.B. Pritzker now, just being a pugnacious, but still very much of the establishment? I just don't know. And again, it's more just an intellectual curiosity. Is the path forward for not just Democrats, but the millions of people in the country who are skeptical about all of this, including even the folks at the Dispatch, right? Who, have many of whom have made their concerns with the president and some of his actions known. Is it equal punchback pugnacity? Is it someone from the center, from within the system, who can speak to all things? I just don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
And there's an answer.
It's a refrain on here to point out that this podcast is called The Remnant for a reason, right? Like, I've made peace with the fact that I am, forget that I'm named after a prophet without honor. I am at peace with the fact that no one wants to follow my advice, right? And but this is an age-old problem with punditry in general, is how much, and you see it all the time with rookie pundits, of how often people confuse what they want with what is smart politics. And I very much would like to live in a country where it would be really, really, really smart politics for everybody to imitate Mitch Daniels and be blazingly, boringly competent.
Yeah.
and decent and sweet and talk to people from the other side and say, oh, you make a good point. Let's see how we can work together.
Yeah.
And I think there isn't a real demand for that crap, but it is very difficult to institutionalize or monetize or exploit that demand through the political process as it's currently constituted. I mean, I'm sure you meet all sorts of normies all the time who say, why does Washington have to be like this? And it's...
Yeah, it's, but to sort of push back on your point, the way you push back on a similar point of mine, I would question whether it was just how Romney was labeled, only because I think I'm thinking back to what's the last series of candidates prior to Clinton. I think Clinton Dole was the last totally twisted, everybody angry election, I think. Maybe 2000.
96?
96, because 2000 was still...
Clinton Dole was 96, right?
Clinton Dole was 96. Yeah. No, okay, because 2000 was acrimonious over the outcome,
right?
But there was no allegations of fascism and stuff like that in that election. It was just a partisan center-left versus center-right election.
Yeah.
04 is where it started getting ugly, I think.
I think that's right.
Because then you had people's reaction to the Iraq War and people came down on Bush really hard and so on. But to be clear, it's not just Romney. Obama but I just mean Obama was literally known as a Muslim non-citizen socialist.
Yeah.
Now, he was certainly a center-left Democrat, not a socialist by any stretch of the imagination. But that became the framing of the political, even center left, not even the far left in the country. Now, so you have that narrative on the left, and then all of they're all racist, they're all fascist on the right. And I think that's where we are today. Getting back to my thing about 2028, what will the path forward out of it be? And I just don't know if it's to find a Mitch Daniels who can get through the primary or not. Really quickly is a separate point. You know who that should have been? It should have been Tim Walz. Like on paper and just in terms of framing and how just that level of boring white guy competence prior to literally the day he accepted the nomination, maybe before 2020, because that's when things got ugly for everybody in the country. There's an argument to be made that middle America swing-ish state governor, Minnesota's pretty blue, but you know what I mean? It could have been that, but now obviously that, I want people to hear me. I'm just merely throwing it out there in the abstract. That's not happening and should not happen, but you know what I mean?
But so, I mean,
on paper, it was just on paper. Tim Walz on paper is what I mean.
On paper, yeah. Because I very much looking forward to the day where we're like, what was the name of the guy who ran for vice president in 2024? Just
2024.
He becomes an answer to a trivia question. It's like,
you've seen the SNL bit
with Tim Kaine. Yeah.
Tim Kaine.
Yeah, no.
This is the most important election of our lifetime. You said this about 2016, but and Tim Kaine comes out, right?
And who is this guy? Yeah.
I don't know.
So I recently gave a talk to here in DC, and I tried to summarize the problems of the two parties by saying they both have an identity crisis. The Republican party's identity crisis is that its identity is incredibly narrow now, narrow, incredibly fixed. It is Donald Trump's party,
without
sweet,
question.
Right? And and is defined entirely about Donald Trump. That's going to be a real problem going forward because either for actuarial or constitutional reasons, Donald Trump won't be here forever. And a party defined as the Trump party without Trump is going to be a politically weird thing. The Democratic Party is a different identity crisis. I just don't think it knows who it is. And,
without question.
And so my question for you, normally the Democratic Party is, there's nothing, I mean this in no pejorative way. It's the party of government. In the sense that every country has at least one. Most countries have many parties of government, but I
would go broader, institutions and government.
But it's the
government being an institution.
But it's the party that says the government should be organized around helping people, and here's what the government can do for you, and all that kind of stuff. it's, and then if you get one layer deeper, it's the party of urban liberalism, right? Blue states. If it doesn't have blue cities, what does it have? That's its real constituency.
In the last 20 years.
For sure.
And I think the party shifted to, yeah.
So it's one thing if you actually run those cities really well.
Yeah.
Right. Then you can sustain yourself because that's where most people live. It's where all the money is, If you suck at that, what would you say you do here? Right.
So it's interesting. I would add on top of the party of blue liberals or whatever, but also moral purity in a way that moral, intellectual, and ideological purity in a way that I don't see among Republicans. In that, part of what certainly a recurring theme in the 2024 election was Democrats are just beholden to the wokeness of their base. I mean, that's a pejorative way of putting it, but Democrats are far more likely to be canceled by other Democrats than Republicans are to be canceled by other Republicans for saying the wrong thing, right? There are, let's go back to Marjorie Taylor Greene, might pick on a moderate Republican for saying something suggesting regulation of firearms or whatever else, but there isn't we have to send him out of our fold because he did not take a moral position in the way that we demand. And that is a strong voice on the left in America that's just different on the right. It's just different. Like, I just feel like there's far more of an impulse to kill one's own on the left that, to your identity crisis point, has led to a bit of an identity crisis, because there's nothing novel about having a center and a wing in a political party. The Republicans have it too. But the problem is that I just feel like the wing is trying to eat the center.
Yeah. So here's where I was going to push back on when you tried to add institutions.
Trying to add what?
When you said that the left is the Democrats the party of government and institutions, and in one sense, I totally get what you're saying, and I got no objection to it. On the other hand, and it's just because I just wrote my LA Times column about this, it's front of mind. There's this thing in institutional economics called, or organizational theory called institutional isomorphism. And,
you lost me, but I'm here for it. Go for it.
And basically what it means is the tendency of institutions to start mimicking each other and being indistinguishable from each other. And so sort of like the fast food chain that starts out doing Mexican food and ends up selling burgers and wraps and salads and all that kind of stuff, right? And Dunkin' Donuts, now you can get an espresso and a frappuccino there and a salad, and Starbucks you can get a donut, right? It's that kind of tendency to just sort of be all things to all people. The ACLU used to have a very specific lane, right? It was defending basically First Amendment rights, mostly speech, but also association, conscience, worship, that kind of thing. Yeah. And over the last 30 years, it's become a generic progressive institution to the point where it even turns it back on some First Amendment issues for the greater good kind of thing, right? And I think that's when you talk about the purity and intellectual thing on the left, that's part of its problem. If it was truly the party of institutions, it would have a higher degree of tolerance for the idea that some institutions should just stay in their lane. And I think one of the things that has gotten the left into so much trouble is the homogenization of liberalism. And so you have foundations that, when the National Poetry Foundation had to fire its board because they were bad on settler colonialism and Black Lives Matter. I mean, like this idea that every institution has to have the same opinion. Yeah. That every Hollywood personality has to have the same causes. It lessens you have fewer antibodies intellectually and politically in your cause, and you have to agree with everything or you're not a good person. Yeah. And that's the shit that got Kamala Harris in so much trouble.
Yeah. Now that is as much a support of my statement that the left and friendly fire, right? That there are probably
in the 30s we would call it popular frontism, right? But
right. I mean, there are probably organizations on the right that don't hew entirely to the basic tenets of conservatism, but aren't, they're not going to have their boards fired over it. It's just, you're going to have people at the Federalist complaining about it, and that'll really be it. No, but I'm going to push back to your pushback. I still think it is a fundamental tenet of liberalism, at least in America, is government is fundamentally good, libraries fundamentally good, the medical industry fundamentally good, schools, public schools, even private schools, fundamentally, all of them are just good, and we have to save them. We have to save them. We have to save them, not make them smaller or tear them down or whatever else. And I really do think that why I added institutions to the government thing, which we're both in agreement. Liberals do just sort of believe in, why would we ever break down such and such an institution, even if it's strayed from its core principles? It's an institution, and by being there, it will necessarily protect us. I think that is how I would define modern liberalism.
Yeah, I mean, look, yeah. I think the right has its own institutional isomorphism, right? I mean, like, it is much easier for me to list the institutions on the right that didn't go Trumpy than to list the ones that did, because most of them did almost overnight, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm proud to be affiliated with, I mean, like, I'm very proud of founding the Dispatch. But, National Review, I don't agree with every single thing that they've published over the last 10 years, but they've kept their integrity about them in the age of Trump in a way that a lot of other right-wing institutions didn't.
Absolutely.
And the American Enterprise Institute, the think tank I've been at off and on for most of my adult life, has resisted this tide in ways that the Heritage Foundation, couldn't dream of doing. And then there's the Federalist Society a little bit, and then there are a handful of other things, and that's about it. And everything else, from Fox to all its imitators to most of the right-wing media, they've all gone Trumpy almost overnight. And part of the problem is, I would argue, is that, I mean, I take your point culturally or psychologically, how liberals think about institutions, but the whole point of institutions in sort of development theory, or, Douglas North stuff about how, capitalism emerges, is that they're supposed to be sort of breakwaters. They're supposed to be independent ecosystems that are resistant to populist tides, right? And they have to be a little sticky. They have to be a little different than just sort of the generic existence on the street. Otherwise, why would they exist? And the problem, I think, with the left, look, there's no reason, it's just a matter of math, that the top 25 universities or the Ivy League schools would have all gone woke in largely the same way, except for this problem of the institutional isomorphism, this pressure towards conformity. You're all seeking the same kind of awards, praise. You're seeking the same kind of students. You're seeking the same kind of foundation charitable money. And that ecosystem becomes very insular and bubbly. And and I think America would have been a lot stronger if there were real profound differences between, say, Columbia, Yale, Harvard, and Princeton. And instead of them all being sort of cookie cutters to one extent or another of each other, and the real differences are where they have eating clubs or what their policy on Greek life is, right? I mean, I want institutional pluralism at a really high level. And we don't have that in this country in a lot of ways. And I think it's one of the reasons why our politics is boiled down to a fight between two competing monocultures.
Yeah, I mean, the way to get that is not to impose, as the president has tried to do, at least on Harvard and Columbia.
Oh, I agree with you on that.
Quotas on the number of conservatives on faculty, and so
that's all idiotic. I agree. Yeah, that's totally idiotic.
I don't know.
I just love the idea that there's just like a whole bunch of right-wing chemistry professors and English professors waiting on the sidelines to take those jobs. I mean, it's
English professors, maybe chemistry professors. You could probably find conservative literary thinkers. Hard sciences, I don't know. Well, who knows? I don't know.
I don't know. With PhDs, I'm skeptical. But anyway, All right, my friend, we went a little long, and I got to go write something, and then I got to see you in a few hours at CNN.
I know, literally just a matter of hours.
So thank you for doing this, and we will we will have you back when 5 Bullets comes out, available for pre-order now on Amazon.
All the above, yeah.
And thank you for doing this.
No, lovely chatting. This was great. One, it was great. Two, I'm a big fan of the Dispatch and its work, and frankly, its readership or listenership. I just think to the point that we got through about 6/7, as my son would say, 6/7 of the way through here, about the need for conservative voices that have sort of just willing to poke and ask the questions, but without almost abasing themselves to sort of get on the MAGA train. I just think you all are such an important voice, and it's just good to have this forum, before you're all imprisoned.
That's right. Well, the good thing is you can have the cell next to me. We can continue this debate there.